All right. Let's start. First, I apologize for the stream. Not much I could do. I wasn't sure. How did it look in the end? Sherry, would you what was it choppy even until the end?
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. It's too bad because the past films were okay. We had a little trouble with another film, but in general, it was fine. So I apologize for that. We're gonna have to work on that for the next film festival. Um, so this is an interesting movie. Just for a little background, this is a first film for Juan Cáceres, this Chilean director. The film came out only a few weeks before uh, what happened in Chile last year. There were all these huge riots in Chile, and because of all the inequalities and the neoliberal system that they have in Chile, where people are really unhappy. Um, and it's reflected on all these characters that we see. And the interesting comments that the boss of that company is making. Nobody in Chile wants to work, right? But I would just wanted to mention that, and before we start, that this was a preamble of what was really happening in Chile. They had a huge riots in the whole country, really, mostly in Santiago, in the capital, and only a few, like 2 weeks ago, have they approved. A motion to change the constitution and try to get a new deal between the government and the people, which I think it's great, and I'm very hopeful that they will be able to negotiate and manage something better than what they have right now, which is really not good. Obviously, it's been brewing, these rumblings, all these riots. It's been in the works for many years, decades, I would say. So this film came out, and it really is like a good complement to what's happening in Chile. You can find out on your own. But Sherry, and we're here again just to make sure that you heard that our guest tonight is Sherry Osrich, associate professor of history, specialist in Latin America from the history department. So, what are your first impressions of this film?
Yeah, I just think it's an amazing film. I think it taps into the very specific things about what's happening with immigration in Chile, and the racism and discrimination and the real vulnerability of immigrants, particularly in Santiago. But also it speaks to this whole issue around global migration and issues that a lot of countries are facing. And I was glad that you brought up the issue of the constitutional changes that are going to be happening, because I think the film is really directly speaking to the ways in which specific laws around immigration really put people coming into the country, immigrants coming into the country, at a serious disadvantage because of this decree law of 1074, is like the famous decree that was written under Pinochet. And there are aspects of this constitution that were written in the context of a dictatorship, right? So it's very difficult then to imagine that the current regulatory framework around the restrictions of work restrictions and all of these things that really put immigrants in a precarious situation. How do you reconcile that, right, with Chile's image as an inclusive democracy, right? So these things have been really butting heads, the kind of legal aspects of immigration versus how Chile wants to present itself on the world stage. So I just thought there's a lot of global issues that you can see happening in this film, that aren't, just happening in Chile. But and immigration isn't a new thing,
No.
you know, but the fact that a lot of the recent immigrants have come from Caribbean countries, and have come from Haiti particularly. Chile is often purported, it's this wealthy, one of the wealthiest countries in Latin America, but it's also one of the most unequal countries. So while that presenting itself as a wealthy country, it draws people in. They're struck by the inequality and how they're treated when they get to Chile as an immigrant. So the fact that the recent immigrants are facing the kind of discrimination, the kind of racism that we see in the film, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they're in the city, they're in Santiago, and they're a higher profile visibility just for the fact of the color of their skin. In the same way that some, Bolivian immigrants would be discriminated against. But if like 50% or so of the immigrant population is from Argentina or Peru, they're less likely to suffer the kind of direct racism that we see happening to people like Stevie and other people from Haiti. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
yeah. So,
Yeah, and it's interesting. You mentioned that Chile is definitely one of the countries that is the wealthiest in South America, and the economy is really working. But as we are seeing, and we can just attest, just because you're good and the market is good and the economy is good, that doesn't mean that things are well, And you see, still still a human capital that is important, and just because the economy is doing well and there are even jobs, you could even argue that there are jobs, it doesn't mean that things are well. There are many things that are not working really. The inequality, the social justice is totally lacking. And yes, Chile really is not traditionally a country of where that has welcomed immigrants. um, and I could see that last year. I went to Santiago for the first time in March, just a few months before the riots, and um, I was struck by seeing this Haitian immigrants working out right outside of the subway system, selling little things. But lately, in the past few years, also there are like Bolivian, Ecuadorian, Peruvian immigrants for sure. I mean, they're always been there. When I said that Chile wasn't a country that welcomed immigrants, I meant from the 19th century and onwards.
right.
But yes, lately, more than Haitians now, unfortunately, there's been a wave of Venezuelan
Mm-hmm.
immigration, and it's sad to see because Venezuela obviously has their own very severe problems, and people have migrated into other countries like Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia, and Chile, Colombia. So they're all have migrated into all these neighboring countries, and in Chile it's not the exception. So there's a new shade of this experience that also that it could very well be another movie if, if,
Right.
if they could make another movie out of this. But um, I I thought the main topic was immigration for sure, and that's everybody can attest to that when you watch the film. But what really interests me most was um, the topic of the other, the topic of being different, and that's what I see with Stevens. It's not only that he's an immigrant, it's not only that he is black, which obviously those are the two main points of contention, right? And it's also that he's young. It's also that he wants to be different. No, he wearing the hair extensions. That's how the film starts, right? The first scene is all these people asking, "Why do you want this?" It's not going to be, something that I guess it's not. You're not going to be. People are not going to like this when they see you wearing these hair extensions. But he liked that. He wants to be different. He's a sensitive person. Uh, Regardless of how he reacted to this. I mean, I don't know how you could react to being treated like that every day, and just trying to swallow this and then not say anything, which is horrendous. That whole scene with the boss and then commentary is just like unbelievable, that to accept. And there's nothing they can do. You know, there is these immigrants are just subject to this, and they have no rights, they have no saying. So I was struck by that, the idea of difference, the idea that
Mhm.
he's different, he wants to be different, and it's also it plays against him in this homogeneous society that even his own community turns its back on him because they're afraid themselves of how the Chileans or the Chilean authorities are going to react to this. Um,
Well,
what
it's funny you mentioned that about the other, because when I was thinking about that law that I brought up, that decree law that was written in the 70s, that they've applied to these immigrants coming to Chile. The really curious thing about that law is it doesn't allow for the language of immigrant or immigration. It's only about foreigners and foreigners as a threat to national security. And that's the language in which it's written, that it's not about, like, they're not under the law, that they're not considered immigrants at all, that they fall under this heading of
Yeah,
just foreigners, foreign born, and have no right, like there's no right of habeas corpus. So they have no due process of the law at all, which was supposed to be guaranteed in the transition to a democracy, that you have the right to representation, and you have due process, and these are things essential, we think, but not if you're of this status. And like you were saying, there are these broad powers then that are given, some of them spelled out specifically, but some of them, like the boss, does he have the right to do that? Well, he's allowed to do, he's allowed to sort of hold over their head, right? Whether he's going to employ them without papers or not. And what those papers represent is survival and recognition of you as existing as a person.
yes, absolutely.
And without them, who are you? He's a nameless, faceless person, and he seems to really, the film, I think, really captures his struggle to be heard and seen, and how he's just totally on the margins after that incident happens at work. It just completely throws him, again, he's already the other, and now he's even outside of that further. But yeah, it really gets to the different layers, I think, of understanding this real precarity.
And the title of the film is called is Perro Bomba, which really has different meanings. In the context of this film, it really means cannon fodder. So you are, you are this immigrant that, like you are saying, has no status, no right, no nothing, no saying, and you are part of the economy. Although you are still part of the economy. I mean, they work, they're being exploited. They work at this brick company, and they also are being exploited on the streets by this guy selling the chocolates. So they're the cannon fodder. They are the ones that will take the worst jobs, the jobs that nobody wants, and they will be exploited. So that's part of it too. You could see it from that point of view. Brianna asked, with the current Chilean constitution, are there any laws protecting immigrants? Well, I think Sherry has mentioned that not.
Yeah, that decree, that 1074 decree law, it really gives broad, like, sweeping powers for deportation, any kind of exclusion. And it also really makes having that authorization to work, that those papers, as like the primary way in which you can be part of society in any way. But that process of getting that authorization, it's really bureaucratic. It's a really burdensome process. And I mean, even people who, you know, come to the US have to renew visas and things, and that's even can be, you know, a horrible long process. This is really, really worse. And you're in that kind of precarious state if you're trying to get that authorization and going through that process. So no, I think not having the automatic sort of a right of due process of being able to say my
Although
rights as a human being are being exploited. I'm a Perro Bomba for the state, basically. I'm expendable.
yeah.
Yeah.
Although Stevens, and from what I see, I think he had a resident car, and he had achieved that the extra higher level step where he has his resident car, so he can legally actually work. But you can see how precarious his situation is. Even
Right.
when he just achieved this, he was back to zero again, and it has no recourse and no help, no defense. Obviously, nobody talks about what the boss did to him. Nobody cares. All they talk about is what he did, you know, the violence that he inflicted on him, but not the violence that the boss did. So let's go back to the chat. Somebody says people immigrating are put at a disadvantage because they have to accept mistreatment to get a crumb of a better life. Well, you couldn't have put it any better. You, in a nutshell, has described that how the life of an immigrant is. So yes, and this movie is basically a paradigm of this. Terrell asks what happened at the end of the movie. The end of the movie is interesting. Um, do you think there's a hope? I think there's some hope in the end of the movie, right? It doesn't end terribly.
I like that it's open-ended though. Like I like the fact that the style, and I think the director doesn't want to be so heavy-handed. And I mean, I think he wants us to try to identify with the situation, but maybe not necessarily interpret everything exactly the same way. So I could see, in the one hand, it could be, it's the first positive, you know, treatment he received that wasn't exploitative at all in
Where
some
it comes
way. Like
from, it's interesting, right? Where
what?
it comes from, the help, the real help, because you can argue the lady lawyer tried to help him pro bono, and that was nice, but in the end she also exploited him. She exoticized him. She had these desires for him, and he's such a vulnerable person that he had no recourse but to follow through. Although he had some decency in himself and left, he just couldn't deal with it. But the only person that helped him was someone else like him, and I
Right.
think, right, it was
Yeah.
in someone just like him, and he ended up being in this house that seems to be like some sort of utopian house, right? It's
Yeah.
a boarded up. It was a boarded up house, and it was taken over by these squatters, but they have formed a community. This guy just invited everyone in, and then they're just trying to protect themselves. So in a way, I think it's showing that, you know, that solidarity seems to only be understood and be given by someone just like him, someone different just like him, which is, I thought, you know.
Yeah, it's so interesting that it kind of comes back to that, because there are no like programs for, you know, for, I'll say assimilation for lack of a integration, I guess, to integrate immigrants coming into Chile, like, you know, language classes or whatever. You know, there's nothing to assist them in any kind of transition other than, you know, like the pro bono work that some of the lawyers try to do, but there's nothing that the state has to make that transition easy. And I mean, these people are working in the informal economy, so they're doing the jobs that are, you know, that the city, little things that allow some people to have the lives that they have, right? But it struck me as, you know, I really liked the beginning that showed sort of the way in which, you know, that family had, you know, they're eating they're speaking Spanish and they're eating some traditional Chilean foods, but they're also still, you know, keeping their culture alive. And it seemed like the minute that he's broken away from that, his situation becomes worse. Like the moment he leaves that support system of his family, which to me was sort of the embodiment of like keeping his Haitian culture alive, because they're speaking Creole at home too and things like that, that he's immediately, so his assimilation into Chilean society is his downfall in a
Yeah.
weird way.
Yes, and somebody's asking, Joe is asking, is his deportation inevitable or will he wander the country
Mm.
for the rest of his life looking for odd jobs? I think you answer that. It's the second option for sure. The law in Chile, the government, the authorities have already made a decision that he is guilty. And when the lady lawyer talks to him, and she's trying to help him, but he already made up his mind, the prosecutor. Not only that, but he also mentions that the Haitian community is not gonna help him. They turn their back on him because they're afraid themselves. So what happens with immigrants is that they have no papers. Like you say, they go into odd jobs until they probably are caught, because there's a scene there when the police comes in and they're caught because they're not supposed to sell on the street. And the guy that employs them is paying off the cops so that they can do this, but they're not
Mm-hmm.
supposed to. And in one of these raids, he's gonna get caught and he's gonna probably go to jail and be deported. So that's also the pretty much the option that he has. We don't know what happens to the lawyer that was helping him, although everything gets really muddled when you know he stays at her house and they have sex, and then so that's really not good and then really not ethical, um, to say the least. So but yeah, those are his options in that sense. Joe, um, somebody's asking Sherry, why didn't Steven's friend tell his mom what actually happened?
That's a really good question. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what to say about that. I mean, yeah, I mean, you would think if she really knew what he was doing to stand up for Junior, I think it was, yeah, that, you know, she would be sympathetic, but I don't know, maybe it was, I'm not sure. I think it's a good question.
I
I
think
don't know.
it's just fear.
Yeah,
He got the
yeah,
job, he just got to
right.
the country, and he doesn't want to get involved into this
Mm-hmm.
problems because he already
Yeah.
knows, and probably the mother told him, don't get involved, don't,
Mm-hmm.
they're just gonna get rid of you.
Right.
And this, so the Haitian community in that sense is very conservative from what we're seeing, very religious, nothing wrong with that, but really Christian values seem to get, sort of like have a limit when
Yeah.
it's about survival. And I mean, I don't want to criticize, but that certainly is not the way, the Christian way. But they do cast them out.
Well, and as I'm thinking about it a little bit more too, by telling his mother what Stevie was doing, which was standing up for some, you know, the kind of rights of a human being
Everyone, yes.
and standing up for everyone, that I guess in some ways it's like, well, that's going to be problematic, right? Because she might understand that, but then it's like, well, what is she supposed to do with that? Does she encourage her kids then to stand up for themselves? Or it's almost like he thinks it's better she just doesn't know. Like, you know, would she want to think her son flouted authority or challenged authority? Kind of what you're saying, you know, which would that make her happy, even if it was for someone else's better good, you know, for someone else's good. So I don't know. And he's maybe looking out for himself and not,
Yeah.
yeah.
Sad because it's his childhood friend, and he
Mm-hmm.
helped him get a job, and he won't just help him at all. Uh,
Yeah.
someone is asking, or someone's making a comment. Ethan is making a comment. Is my student. I feel like the question that is trying to be asked during the film is, what should we do about those other people like Steven? People who have to leave their homes because of poverty or violence, but then have to face racism in their everyday life. Well, that's a huge question, and it's the problem with immigration that happens in the U.S. in the whole world. People move to other places not because they want to move. Believe me, I'm an immigrant, uh, and although I haven't experienced anything like this character has experienced, I've been very fortunate. Um, you move to other places mostly because you don't find the opportunities that you can get and where you are from. And these are immigrants are in desperate situations. Haiti is one, if not, it's probably the poorest country in Latin America. And they come here, they come there because they're escaping poverty, they're escaping violence, and you just want something better for yourself, and then you can stay where you are, and it's probably a death sentence for a lot of people. So you will do anything you can to just go to a better place, and that's basically the idea of immigration. And like now, whether you have papers or not, but whether you have a visa or not, that's secondary when you're talking about your life. And how your situation, and having a visa, sure, it matters. They all want it, but you know there are other things that are like first come first. So that's something that only maybe someone that has immigrated understands.
I think too, we're so used to in the US hearing this rhetoric, around, well, particularly right in the last year with the campaign about, the problems caused by immigrants coming into the US, or asylum seekers, but they're called immigrants, whatever, that's another story, right? But the way in which immigrants often become kind of this uh, a scapegoat, right, for a lot of society's problems, and a lot of the social ills are blamed on a foreign-born community. And when you think about in the US, it seems like such a quote unquote problem in our country, where something like 14% of our population is foreign born, and in Chile it's like 6%.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an even smaller percentage in Chile, the number of foreign born people, but it's as big of an issue in terms of politics. Like in the 2019 campaign, what's his name? Sebastian Pinera, right? He was talking all about the problems of immigration and how it's ruining Chile, and he's going to crack down. And this was a big part of that. And it's a big part of what we hear in this country too. But to think that it's not, doesn't even compare in terms of a percentage of the population, so that it doesn't really matter the numbers.
Yeah.
That it's useful to hold immigrants up to this notion of like, it's a criminalization of who they are, and allows the government to continue to put them in this kind of predicament without offering any protections or services or anything.
And let's be clear, immigration is not going to stop. It will
Yeah.
continue as long as there's poverty, inequality, violence, and as long as there's this system, there will be immigration. There's not a wall big enough that's going to stop this. It will not stop, and that's just the way it's going to be. And it's better to deal with it and see what kind of channels, what kind of ways we can mitigate and help and make this a better situation than what it is now, because what it's happening right now obviously is not working and
Right.
is really horrendous. um, Brianna makes another comment and says, I think it could be that they wanted to protect the mom. Maybe they did not want her to know that they have to experience on a daily basis, because if she's not working, she may not know the extent of the racism. What do you think of the female characters in this film, which is what's interesting to see?
Yeah, it seemed like, and I think for Haiti particularly, I know that the numbers, it's there are more women that come to Chile, but I thought they were interesting in terms of their representation as kind of the bearers of culture, because they were the ones like singing Haitian songs and like dancing in the little interim parts,
Yes.
like sort of the carriers of the songs and the traditions, and so I thought that was interesting.
Hmm.
but that they're experiencing kind of the same kinds of discrimination that women face in terms of like domestic violence with that song that they sing at the end. Like,
Not only that, but I mean, we're not sure if the mom works or not. She
right.
probably doesn't. Maybe you're right, but we do see how their women are treated, and it's obviously even worse when he's selling chocolates. I don't know if you remember the scene. There's
Mm-hmm.
a woman that comes in with her child. She can't have someone to take care of the child, and she's just berated by this guy and
Mm-hmm.
basically told not to do this again. This is not my problem. So, and you can see when they escape, the cops coming from in a raid, and he helps her escape with the carriage.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, it's the helplessness of this, having a child there, having to work in this terrible job, and it's just like unconscionable to me. At least, you know, I have a daughter, and I can just imagine being in a situation like this. um,
You really made me think of something when you mentioned that scene, because he didn't have to help her. He could have just taken care of himself and like ran away. But
yeah,
how even in this dehumanizing situation, he's not dehumanizing other people. He sees the humanity and helps her, because to him that's what you do. And he, throughout this, it's like he's reminding us of like, hey, we can sell these chocolates, we don't need you. And he's so aware of the exploitation, and he's not willing in a lot of ways to treat other people like him the way he's being treated. So
absolutely. He's a
yeah.
good, I think he's a good guy. I think he had a moment. It was not a good moment, but how could you take all this abuse, verbal abuse, from him? And absolutely, he shows that he is a good guy. He's really not, you know, that the immigrant that everybody calls, and that fills all the stereotypes. He's dirty. He is just a bad person, and none of that is not is true, you know. And I think that
Yeah.
makes a good does a good job in showing this. Somebody, Ethan writes again. Yes, I agree, and you can also see a bigger issue with kids that aren't reunited with their parents, which is a whole other issue with immigration and how the U.S. deals with it. Well, you touch upon a really sore point here and what's happening in the US. Today, I just read that instead of 545 kids, in reality, it's 656 kids. It's 100 more kids than they thought they had, that won't be reunited with their parents. It's going to be pretty much impossible to find because these parents are so poor and they were deported. And then how are you going to find these parents again? And it's just like, I don't know what to say about this. And what government does that? Um,
For a government that demands that these people have visas to work and that they do all the paperwork and do things so properly, which they are by coming to seek asylum, which is what you do, that we've not kept our paperwork or any, like that, we're not doing what we should do to keep track of these people and treat them humanely. Like we expect them to have all of these things, laid out nicely and legally, and like we don't even do that in our own system. We're not even keeping track. So
it's a
I don't know.
contradiction.
Yeah.
Martina, another student of mine, writes that the sad thing about it is that these immigrants are the ones that are really pushing the economy because the Chileans do not want to work. And it's the same for most countries. Immigrants do the jobs that people in the country think they're above. They just don't want to do. And for them to treat these immigrants that are contributing in major ways to their economy and livelihood is just heartbreaking. It's just a matter of trying to survive. Yeah, and I we always hear these ideas of, oh, they take over the jobs, they use the system to get money from us, but they don't understand that these people live here. They have to like work. They do work. They cannot pay taxes, but they are consumers. They buy things. They live here. They may have cars. They buy gasoline. They're just like you. They buy things and they're part of this economy, and they work on jobs that nobody wants. And that's something that's kind of lost. That people don't understand. They think that they just come here to freeload, which it's not really that possible. I'm not saying there may be some that do, but the majority of them, they come here to work. Um, Someone else writes, no modern country allows people to immigrate without paperwork.
Yeah,
Uh,
I don't think we were saying that they weren't. I mean, there's a difference between someone who's an asylum seeker and someone who's an immigrant. There's a different system in place for either of those situations. And if someone's coming to seek asylum, they wouldn't go through the same channels that someone would go through to get like a work visa.
yes. I mean, one has to think about all the work that these people do in the informal economy, because they're part of the economy, whether you want to argue they shouldn't be here or not. They are part of the economy and they contribute to the economy. In this area, especially with the boom of construction in this area and Myrtle Beach, where I am, and everywhere here, all these houses that you see are being built. I mean, just stop and look and who's building these houses.
Right.
It's them. It's them who are
Mm-hmm.
building these houses. Most of them.
Yeah.
The Americans are the ones that may do the electricity and the more technical things, but the
Right.
building houses are done for all the
Yeah.
immigrants are doing these jobs. Restaurant the same, picking fruit, all the produce.
Yeah.
You could argue the same with what the Chilean boss says. Like no American is gonna work on these jobs. They don't want to work on this. Who's gonna do this? Um, I never seen someone do this kind of jobs. I had a student of mine last year. He lives in upstate here in South Carolina, and he told me that his family has land, and um, he says this work is brutal. They do agriculture, they produce and things, and like nobody does that. Only the immigrants will do these jobs. And we were talking about it in my Latin American class, and so yes, I mean, you can argue all you want, but they're part of the economy, and if they're part of the economy, then you should consider them for certain things, certain I don't know, certain concessions, certain things that maybe to make things better. Um, the last thing I wanted to mention was I'm really not an expert in music, but it was interesting. You didn't mention the intervals where they had the songs. I thought it was interesting to see. The music was great, by the way.
Yeah.
So lively. A mixture of there was a one that had African drums.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's a lullaby. There's
Mm-hmm.
also the sort of rap um, and Caribbean music mixed. And there was this group with the hats that play like norteño music, Mexican.
Mm-hmm.
That was amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
I think it had to do with the moods, right, of the film, of what's happening. Once he's cast out of the Haitian community, they play the sad song,
Yeah.
and it keeps going like that.
Yeah.
But I'm not an expert on this part.
No, I mean, I think too, the fact that it was so global, or it was not just like Chilean music, like it was like across Latin America, and as to me, an example of like, well, there's no borders when it comes to certain things. And, yeah, I thought that was a really interesting way to include. Yeah.
It was the only times they play film, because the movie is really shot in a style, in a documentary reality, hyper reality style with close
Mm-hmm.
shots of the face and no music, no soundtrack. It's just
Mm-hmm.
little music, and which is obviously part of the culture and the community. Now, somebody here,
Mm-hmm.
right? I also feel like this film touched on colorism
Mm-hmm.
and POC communities. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, especially that scene, right, at the work site where the boss is like, look at, everyone, there's this gradation of color, like I never knew. And like, how did you not, like, have you never paid attention? It's just such an ignorant thing. And no one really comments, but there's this sort of like look that they're giving each other, like, what a bizarre thing that he's saying it. But he's just, I guess that he's allowed to say it, like,
Yeah.
because it shows the power relationship there very clearly, that they just have to tolerate this kind of ignorance, I guess. And yeah, I thought that was a really interesting moment.
Another comment Daniel makes, it says, why does it appear the cities were once booming, graffiti, etc.? Well, I can tell you that Santiago is the economy in Chile is good, but if you go around Santiago, it has good infrastructure. It has a subway system that's very efficient, buses. The city is nice, but obviously the center is that way. But if you go around, further from the center, you'll see the poverty that we saw in the film, the rundown houses, and the poverty is for sure is there. Graffiti, I mean, graffiti is everywhere. It's not just graffiti is not only in the US, it's a culture, it's a global culture that you can find everywhere, and it has to do with street and urban culture, and it's a mixture of things. So you'll find that too in Chilean society for sure, and then we saw a little bit of that in this film. But yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add about that.
No, I think that's a good point, that, yeah, that's indicative of, like, yeah, urban life, I think, anywhere. And I think showing just how the conditions that most of the immigrants live in was important to show that the tremendous gap, the tremendous inequality, and that's kind of allowed to exist. That there's he makes that one sort of veiled threat, like when they're like, hey, kicking him out of that one little room he was renting, and they're like, we know who you are and what you did, and leave. And he's like, I'm gonna call the cops on you for this place, which is a dump. And they're kind of like, oh, and so, like, he's aware of what standards of living should be, like, that this is just terrible, but for people like him, that this is what's seen as habitable.
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Which I
sure.
think is part of the dehumanizing process, like what he has to put up with. I think, he's very aware of that. And that's part of a lot of cities, people living on the margins in places like that.
Are
But
there
in this case, a lot of immigrants are there. Yeah.
sorry.
Oh,
Are there any other questions, comments about the film that you'd like to make? And yeah, the film has suffered from distribution. Latin American films are usually takes a few months. What happens is it's precarious because they don't have a lot of money. It's not like a Hollywood film that is distributed with has a budget of $100 million to be distributed all over the world. So what they do is they go into film festivals, and there's small film festivals in Europe usually, and then they win awards, and then once they start getting recognition, they get distribution. A company will come and say, okay, we'll make the DVD, we'll show it on stream, maybe on streaming, and this is how they're become known. And after a few months, this film came out in October of last year, and because of what happened with COVID, a lot of films from last year from Latin America were really affected by this because everything was stalled, and therefore there hasn't been a lot of exposure for this. But yes, this film is very recent. It's from last year.
mm.
So any other questions? I don't think there's any more questions. Well, I want to thank Sherry for coming and for the Q&A. It's been an interesting film, and I want to thank everyone for coming today. This is the last film of the film festival, and hopefully there will be more next year. And that's all. That's all for now. Thank you very much.
Great. Thanks so much. It was a great film, and you have a really nice, lively group of people. So
All
have a
right.
good night. Thanks for asking me to come.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
All
Bye.
right. Bye, everybody.